This week, so we're in the book of Kings, and we've been studying and we've been looking at Elijah and Elisha. And I love background. I love background story. I love the Bible. I love talking about just the background stuff. I sound very loud. Am I loud? It's echoing? Oh. And so I like backgrounds. So let me just give you like a snippet. So kind of like an 80-year history of where Israel is, right? So 80 years ago, Solomon died, and the nation of Israel was united. But because Solomon had many interests, and one of those interests was he allowed other gods to be set up in the temple and worshipped in Israel, which was a big no-no. And so God ripped the kingdom out of his hand and left a part of it, and he divided the nation of Israel into the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom was called Israel, and the southern kingdom called Judah. So in Israel, the northern kingdom, for the past 80 plus years, the Israelites, they were worshiping the two golden calves that was set up by Jeroboam, their first king. And from that time all the way down until probably about like 20, maybe, 20 years ago, following this timeline, they were just worshiping these two golden calves until Ahab came. And then because of his wife Jezebel, they started to worship Baal. So now Israel is not only worshiping the two golden calves, they're also worshiping Baal. And this was a huge no-no. And if you're in my Sunday school class, you guys know, because we're going through Deuteronomy, that worshiping idols was you don't do it. God told the children of Israel that as he gave them the 10 commandments on the Mount Horeb. And he said, look, do not. If you do anything, do not worship other gods. But they did it. They did it. And God says if they would do that, then he was going to take away his protection from them. He was going to cause their enemies to have victories over them. And he would allow all sorts of disease to plague them. Yet, generation after generation, from the time God had given the commandments with Moses all the way to Solomon, all the way to today, King Joram, they've been doing that. They've been worshiping idols. Now, it's not all of the children of Israel who were worshiping idols. There were some of them who didn't worship idols. They followed God the best that they knew how. And, in the stories and the accounts, it says there were 2,000 people, 700 people here who hadn't bowed the knees to Baal. And so some people remained. And those people who remained, and the prophets, they would try to call the children of Israel back to worshiping God, because God didn't completely abandon them. And so here we are, now in the book of 2 Kings, and we've talked about Elijah, and the power has been transitioned to Elisha, and they have been the people, these just ordinary people, being used by an extraordinary God to demonstrate his power and his love. So this morning I want you guys to turn in your Bible to 2 Kings chapter 5. So this morning the point that I want to bring up to you guys, or I want to point out, is that fear and anger and unmet expectation can disrupt the work of God if we do not have a soft heart. And we're going to see this. So 2 Kings chapter 5, it starts out like this. There's this guy named Naaman. He's the captain of the army of Aram. So these are Israel's neighbor and enemy. And he was just like the baddest guy on the block because God allowed him to win all his battles and nobody could stand against him. But there was a problem. He had leprosy. Well, it so happened that before, or a little bit before, you know how I said that God would allow their enemies to have victories over them if they worshipped other idols? Well, they did that. And the king of Aram and the Arameans, they would go into Israel, and in one of their raids, they captured this little girl. So this little girl, she goes and she sees her master. She is the servant of Naaman's wife. She sees Naaman with leprosy, and she's like, oh, this is not good. This is bad. So she goes and tells her mistress, hey, if my master was with the prophets in Israel, then he would be cured of his leprosy. Naaman's like, really? Okay. So Naaman, he goes and he tells the king of Aram, and then the king of Aram sends Naaman with a letter to the king of Israel. And Naaman brought with him gold, silver, and clothes. And he goes. So, one more background stuff. Leprosy in the land of Israel wasn't a good thing. It was a bad thing. And according to Leviticus 13, it was an affliction that is something that God caused on purpose. And the laws that Moses had given to the children of Israel by God, or God had given to the children of Israel by Moses, he had a specific way of dealing with leprosy. They were supposed to go and have this guy look at him, and then do this, and then do that, and then offer this, and then they were supposed to... There was just this huge, intricate system. And so for this little girl, she had that in her mind. She had that in her background. But for the Arameans, it didn't really seem like they cared much about leprosy. Oh, the guy has leprosy, but you know what? He's a general. He wins battles, so, So it wasn't a big deal. But for this girl, it was. And so because it was such a big deal, she thought, hey, I need to help my master out. So she told him about it, and he goes. So picking up in verse 6. It says, he brought the letter to the king of Israel, saying, and now as the letter comes to you, behold, I have sent my servant to you, that you may cure him of leprosy. When the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, am I God to kill and to make alive, that this man is sending word to me to cure a man of leprosy? But consider now and see how he is seeking a quarrel against me. It happened when Elijah, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, that he sent word to the king, saying, why have you torn your clothes? Now let him come to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman came with his horses and his chariots, and stood at the doorway of the house of Elisha. Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh will be restored to you, and you will be clean. But Naaman was furious and went away and said, behold, I thought he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of his Lord, the Lord his God, and wave his hand over the place and cure the leper. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned and went away in rage. The things that disrupt the work of God in our life are many. And from this text we see fear. Fear was the first thing that this king, he reacted in fear. He's like, wait a minute. He's like, am I God? Look at how this man is, verse 7 says, look at how this man is looking for a quarrel against me. Fear is a disrupting force. It causes us to do, and it causes us to run away from God instead of running to God. When we don't like something, when we don't understand what's going on, we don't say, hey, I have a fear. And my fear is, and if anybody, I'm warning you guys, I'm just telling you, but I'm warning you, I hate snakes. I hate snakes. There are times that I have dreams that there's a snake in my bed. And snakes. I think this guy, this king, was more afraid of the king of Aram than I am of snakes. And not only that, not only is this king reacting out of fear, but the king of Aram has sent the guy, the captain of his army, who has for years been fighting against him. Right? The king of Aram sent Naaman, the captain of his army, to Israel, to the enemy, to the king Jehoram, and says, all right, I want you to cure this guy who has been a plague in your life. Kind of ironic. And if he didn't do it, he's like, this guy is going to start another war with me. And, the king of Aram, he was very feisty. When Ahab was king, that's Jehoram's father, when he was king, he sent messengers to Israel saying, your wives are mine, your best children are mine, and your gold and your silver are mine. And Ahab was like, this guy is more powerful than I am. He has bigger army. His army is like 4 times the size of my army. What am I going to do? And so he's like, all right. So Jehoram has history with this king. And so this king sends his captain, the commander of his army, to Israel, to him, to be healed. And he was afraid. Fear is a tough thing to deal with. And sometimes we become afraid. We worry that the things that we want to do is not going to happen. We worry that we're afraid that if we step out, if we try something new, it won't work. Yet, the problem with that is that when we allow fear to drive us, it sabotages the work of God in our lives and the lives of others. Yet we can't let fear dictate us. And in order to combat fear, and what we need to do as Christians to fight against fear is to turn to God. In verse 8, we see how God responded to the king when he changed his heart. Because he tore his clothes. And in those days and in that time, tearing one's clothes wasn't just like, I'm hulking out. It was like, I'm at the end of my ropes. I have nowhere else to turn. I have no help. I am beyond my strength. And that's what the king did. He's like, I don't have any more strength. And he tore his clothes. And as a result of his humbling himself, recognizing his limitations, he tore his clothes, and God responded. Verse 8 says, it happened when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, that he sent word to the king saying, why have you torn your clothes? Now let him come to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel. God responds to humility. And we saw that in the verse. Even though Jehoram, he was a wicked king. He followed in the ways of his father, Ahab. And I mean, he did not have any good bones in his body. But yet God listened to him because he changed his heart. So fear is one of the things that endangers the work of God in our lives. Another thing that endangers God's work or can sabotage God's work in our life is unmet expectations. Verses 9 through 10. It says, "So Naaman came with his horses and his chariots and stood at the doorway of the house of Israel. Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, 'Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh will be restored to you, and you will be clean.' But Naaman was furious and went away and said, 'Behold, I thought he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the place and cure the leper. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean?' So he turned and went away in a rage." I mean, this guy's a general. He's not like some insignificant little puny foot soldier. I mean, he's like the second in command of Aram. And Elisha is like, "You know what? Go tell him this." You know, it's so interesting how... Actually, have you guys ever planned to go somewhere? You plan a vacation, you plan a trip, you plan to go do something, right? And the way you planned it, you saw step by step, this is going to happen, then this, then that, then this, right? And then you go and you're doing it, and nothing happens the way you want it to happen. I mean, everything goes the opposite. This was this guy. He's like, "I'm not going to stand for this," so he storms off. And because of his anger, because of his unmet expectation, he's like, "Nope." And not only that, I am not going to wash in that Jordan River. All of my rivers in my country is so much better than these. No. And he leaves. Here's this little girl, little slave girl, who, because of the actions and the sins of her leaders, people in the nation, she's a captive. She's a slave. And she's serving this mighty general. And she believed in God. She kept her faith despite her circumstances. And she has set the foundation for him to be cleansed. She believed it. And he was this close to not being cleansed. It's like when you know somebody, parents, you might know this. You see that your child has this wonderful gift, right? Or somebody you know, they have this awesome special gift. And so you say to them, "Hey, you should do this." And they're like, "I'll think about it." And then you're like, "Yeah, come on, let's do it." And so you get the paperwork, you fill it out, you go to somebody, you talk to them about it, and they're like, "Okay." And you're just hoping, you're just crossing your fingers, and you're like, "Don't mess it up, don't mess it up, don't mess it up, don't mess it up, don't mess it up." I think that's what I see here. Naaman is this close to just, he's like, no. Because his expectation, he thought that Elijah was going to come out and say, "General, I am the man of God." Oh. And not only, Elisha didn't even show his face. He sent some like puny little guy and say, hey, he said, go over there and do this. I think it was that, the insult. I mean, this guy is a general. He wins wars. It's like everybody, it's like he walks and the water parts. That's how big he is. And that didn't matter to Elisha. He just be like, hey, this is what God said. Go over there and wash and be cleansed. And he's like, nope, I'm not doing it. And so he almost messed up this. He almost sabotaged the work of God in his life. Yet, we see that he softened his heart. The way we soften our hearts and we change our minds, there are two things. It's by listening to wise counsel Now I know what it feels like, that guy who was on a debate. He's like, I'm going to do three things. I'm going to do this, and then he forgot his other two points. Listening to wise counsel. That's one way to soften and change our heart. See, Naaman listened to the little girl when she said, you can be healed. And so he went to his king. And then the king of Israel softened his heart when he listened to the words of Elisha and sent Naaman to him. And now Naaman is listening to the voice of wise counsel, the voices of his servants. Verses 13 through 14. It says, then his servants came near and spoke to him and said, my father, had the prophet told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then when he says to you, wash and be clean? So he went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God, and his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was cleansed. See, a change of heart comes when we listen to wise counsel. I can't tell you how many times I've said, you know what, I am not going to do this. I'm done. I give up. I throw in a towel. And then somebody will come and say, hey, have you considered this? I'm like, no. How about looking at it from this person's perspective? Well, I guess I didn't. And because I listened, I allowed other people to speak into my life, I was able to change my heart. I was able to not go through with what I said I was going to do, which is just to throw in the towel and give up. Another way, so this is my second way, the second thing. Our change of hearts come when we do not let our circumstances be a limitation to our loving God. Verses 15 through 19. When Naaman returned to the man of God with all his company and came and stood before him, he said, behold, now I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. So please take a present from your servant now. But he said, as long as the Lord lives, before whom I stand, I will take nothing. And he urged him to take it, but he refused. Naaman said, if not, please let your servant at least be given 2 mule load of earth, for your servant will no longer offer burnt offerings, nor will he sacrifice to other gods, but to the Lord. In this matter, may the Lord pardon your servant. When my master goes into the house of Ramah to worship there, and he leans on my hand, and I bow myself in the house of Ramah. When I bow myself in the house of Ramah, the Lord pardon your servant in this matter. Verse 19. He said, Go in peace. Not only was Naaman a mighty general, a valiant warrior, but he had responsibilities. He's like, wait, there's only one God. There's no other God in all the earth. There's only one God. Oh. But when I get back home, the king's going to go and worship in the house of Ramah, and he's going to take me with him because I'm his right-hand man. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? And he thought, he's like, can I be pardoned for this? Will God hold this against me? Will he not hold this against me? Because I have to do this. I mean, it's not like I can just defect from Aram and come to Israel, because my king's going to go and find me. I know state secrets. I'm powerful here. And I love how it ends. Elisha said to him, go in peace. Naaman had a change of heart. His heart was softened. He didn't let his anger overcome him. He didn't let his fear drive him away. And he listened. He listened to wise counsel. I mean, this guy, you have to know that he listens to wise people all the time. He listens. He's not, to become a general, to have the rank that he has, he doesn't just say, well, I'm going to do this because I feel that I should do it. He's a guy who has people around him to talk to him. And in this case, he won. He won because he now confesses that the God of Israel, like that song that we just sang, there's no God like Jehovah. There's no God like Jehovah. That's what Naaman's saying. And he's like, I'm going to have to perform my duties. Will God pardon me? Will God forgive me because of what I'm about to do? I love this passage of Scripture because there's a struggle that I have. I love telling people about Jesus. I do. That's just like, I love telling people about Jesus. I'm telling you, I love telling people about Jesus. I love it so much that I will read Deuteronomy to understand it so I can teach people. But there are times I run into a snag. There are people who I know, and I want to tell them about Jesus, but because of their livelihood, their faith, right, what they profess right now, is connected to their livelihood, is connected to their family structure. And if I tell them about Jesus, it can jeopardize everything in their life. And well, I don't have enough money to start supporting them. I don't. And when I read this passage of Scripture, it gives me hope that God doesn't want people to come to Him before their circumstances change. He wants people to come to them as they are, where they are. And He will take care of them. Here's this king, or here's this general who he has state duty that he's going to have to fulfill. And because he had a soft heart, his heart was softened, he now has the peace of God. As I conclude, I want to say, we should remember that we should not let fear and anger and unmet expectations cause us to sabotage the work of God in our lives and in the lives of others. So just because I'm afraid that if I share the gospel with somebody, their lives are going to be jeopardized, I shouldn't be afraid of it, because God will take care of it. And it's when we change our hearts, it's when we soften our heart. And we do this by listening to wise counsel and not letting our circumstances and our obligations limit the power of God in our lives or the lives of others.